Samurai Nippon. The final great battle of the Warring States period. The Osaka Summer Campaign, 5 days that changed history.
Introduction.
In the shimmering summer heat, the tips of swords gleam under the sun. A battle that will determine the fate of the nation is about to begin. To the west stands an army of 70,000, betting the very existence of the Toyotomi clan. To the east, a massive force of 150,000 led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. The land of Osaka is about to become the stage, upon which Japanese history will be rewritten. Will the dreams and ambitions left behind by Toyotomi Hideyori turn to ashes under this scorching sun, or will they shine with new light? The curtain rises on the Osaka Summer Campaign, the final great battle of the Warring States period.
Chapter 1. Overview of the Osaka Summer Campaign.
In May 1615, a battle that would dramatically alter the course of Japanese history was about to begin. The Osaka Summer Campaign was not merely a conflict, but a pivotal moment that would determine Japan's political structure and future. This battle can be considered the final chapter of the Warring States period. The century-long struggles between warlords were about to culminate in a confrontation between two major powers, the Toyotomi and Tokugawa clans. On one side stood Toyotomi Hideyori, heir to the legacy of Toyotomi Hideyoshi and the warriors who supported him. On the other side was Tokugawa Ieyasu, who had achieved victory at the Battle of Sekigahara and had already established de facto control over the government, along with his family and retainers. This confrontation was not simply a military clash, but a fundamental conflict over the political system established by Hideyoshi and what would follow in his absence. Would Hideyoshi's legacy be preserved, or would a new era begin? History was seeking its answer. The Osaka Summer Campaign unfolded from May to June 1615. Centered around the Osaka region, the year before had seen the Osaka Winter Campaign, which had ended in a peace agreement, though the Tokugawa forces had laid groundwork for future conflict. By filling in the outer moats of Osaka Castle, the main battlefields of the summer campaign were the areas surrounding Osaka Castle, particularly the hilly regions around Tennoji and Shitennoji Temple. This terrain would significantly influence the course of the battle. During this period, while Toyotomi Hideyori was officially recognized as Hideyoshi's successor, real power had shifted to Tokugawa Ieyasu. Through his victory at Sekigahara and his shrewd policies toward the various daimyo feudal lords, Ieyasu had steadily solidified his nationwide control. However, the continued existence of the Toyotomi clan remained a major concern for Ieyasu. There was always the possibility that anti-Tokugawa forces might rally around the Toyotomi, presenting a threat that Ieyasu was determined to eliminate. Meanwhile, the Toyotomi side felt the pressure from the Tokugawa and feared that even their survival was in jeopardy.
Chapter 2. Disparity in military strength and strategy.
The Toyotomi army numbered about 70,000 troops. While this was not a small force by any means, it was less than half the size of the Tokugawa army, placing them at a clear numerical disadvantage. The Toyotomi forces consisted primarily of warriors, who had taken refuge in Osaka Castle and their retainers. Many of Hideyoshi's former vassals had already sided with the Tokugawa or maintained neutrality, which limited the purely Toyotomi forces. In contrast, the Tokugawa army boasted an overwhelming force of about 150,000 troops. Ieyasu had mobilized daimyo from across the country, particularly from the Tokai and Kanto regions, preparing for what was truly a total war. This force included contingents from various daimyo, some of whom may have privately sympathized with the Toyotomi, but were compelled to side with the Tokugawa based on the circumstances. In this sense, not all of the Tokugawa army necessarily possessed strong unity. The disparity of 70,000 against 150,000 troops was extremely significant for a battle in the Warring States period. Moreover, the Tokugawa forces had gathered elite warriors from across the country and held the advantage in equipment, including firearms. To overcome this disadvantage, the Toyotomi forces needed bold strategies that defied convention, as well as high morale among each soldier. They were resolved to fight, despite knowing they were outmatched. In the face of what seemed a hopeless situation, the Toyotomi forces formulated a strategy for survival. Their basic approach was defensive warfare maximizing the use of terrain. Specifically, they planned to establish multiple defensive lines centered on Osaka Castle, dividing and defeating the enemy separately. They also planned tactics involving small units conducting surprise attacks to confuse the enemy's large army, creating opportunities for counterattacks.
Chapter 3. Defensive Strategy. Utilizing Terrain.
The area surrounding Osaka Castle had high strategic value as a natural stronghold. To the east was the Wamachi Plateau, and to the south stretched a landscape interspersed with narrow valleys. These geographical features made it difficult for the numerically superior enemy to attack en masse, providing the Toyotomi forces with the advantage of being able to defend efficiently with fewer troops. The Toyotomi forces skillfully established defensive lines, utilizing these natural features. For instance, they created positions with cliffs or valleys to the front, making it difficult for the enemy to launch frontal assaults. They also concentrated troops at narrow passages, employing tactics to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. This made it possible to engage with roughly equal numbers of combatants, even when the enemy had twice the overall forces. The basic strategy of the Toyotomi forces was to lure and counterattack. Rather than resisting with full force from the beginning, they would allow the enemy to advance to a certain point before striking with ambush. Troops or flanking units that had been prepared in advance, this strategy was high risk. High return mistiming could lead to the annihilation of their own forces, but it was a necessary gamble to compensate for their numerical disadvantage. However, there were limits to the advantages offered by terrain. The Tokugawa forces also had excellent commanders, who could potentially see through the Toyotomi strategy and devise countermeasures. Additionally, logistical problems would arise in a prolonged engagement. Furthermore, the weather could influence the effectiveness of terrain. Rain could soften the ground, diminishing the advantages of the geographical features they relied upon.
Chapter 4. Key Generals of the Toyotomi Forces.
One of the most notable warriors in the Toyotomi forces was Sanada Yukimura. During the winter campaign, he had constructed a fortress called Sanada Maru, inflicting heavy casualties on the Tokugawa forces. In the summer campaign, he served as a frontline commander for the Toyotomi army. His tactical genius and indomitable spirit provided great support to the numerically disadvantaged Toyotomi forces. Mori Katsunaga was another important warrior in the Toyotomi forces. As a commander from the prestigious Mori family of Western Japan, his reputation helped boost the morale of the soldiers. He was primarily responsible for the defense of the southern area of the castle, playing a crucial role in preventing the Tokugawa forces' advance. His calm judgment and experience were valuable assets in the often chaotic battlefield. The Toyotomi forces included other notable warriors such as Goto Mototsugu Matabe, Chosokabe Morichika, and Kimura Shigenari. Each was assigned to a specific area and fought valiantly against the massive Tokugawa army. Particularly, Goto Matabe was known for his bravery, with records of him charging into enemy lines and defeating many enemy commanders. The presence of such brave commanders provided significant psychological support to the outnumbered Toyotomi forces. The success of the Toyotomi forces heavily depended on the coordination among these commanders. They needed to promptly share information from the front lines and flexibly adjust tactics based on the situation. However, in reality, there were instances of insufficient communication between commanders or independent actions being taken. These issues with the command structure would significantly impact the later stages of the battle.
Chapter 5. Early Developments in the Battle.
On May 6th, both armies faced each other south of Osaka Castle. Initially, they avoided all-out conflict, taking time to observe each other's movements. The Tokugawa forces sought to assess the Toyotomi's defensive posture, while the Toyotomi forces tried to identify weaknesses in the enemy. This tension-filled time was like the calm before a storm. Both armies were extremely cautious in their initial movements. The Tokugawa forces, despite their numerical advantage, avoided reckless charges, having learned lessons from the previous winter campaign. The Toyotomi forces, too, moved in small units for reconnaissance and feints, rather than deploying their entire army at once, probing for enemy reactions. This maneuvering was like a match between master shogi players. Eventually, small-scale clashes began at the front lines. These were more like tests to gauge each other's strength and morale rather than full-scale battles. Neither side gained decisive advantages in these skirmishes. Instead, they reconfirmed each other's capabilities. In particular, the defensive strength of the Toyotomi forces exceeded the Tokugawa forces' expectations. Both armies gradually adjusted their overall formations. The Tokugawa forces distributed their troops across multiple approach routes, aiming to disperse the Toyotomi's defenses. The Toyotomi forces positioned their elite troops at key locations, optimizing their deployment to maximize the advantages of the terrain. The movements of both armies were the prelude to the great battle about to unfold.
Chapter 6. Movements of the Shogunate Forces.
Within the Tokugawa forces, there was a radical faction that desired an early decisive battle. Growing impatient with the prolonged standoff, they began advocating for launching attacks based on their own judgment. Their movements sometimes failed to align with the main force's strategy, causing confusion. However, their proactive approach occasionally yielded unexpected results. The strategy ultimately adopted by the Tokugawa forces was a simultaneous attack from multiple directions. They would pressure the Toyotomi forces from all directions, east, west, south, and north, trying to create a breakthrough somewhere. The southern attack, led by a large contingent under Tokugawa Hidetada, posed the greatest threat to the Toyotomi forces. However, this wide-ranging attack also resulted in a more complex command structure. The sheer size of the Tokugawa forces ironically led to confusion in the command structure. Units from different directions sometimes acted based on their own judgments, diverging from the overall strategy. Problems arose particularly when frontline units fell into Toyotomi traps and reinforcements failed to arrive at appropriate times. Such coordination failures occasionally led to localized defeats. The Tokugawa forces included many experienced commanders, but differences in their thinking and judgment sometimes affected the actions of the entire army. The delay in information transmission due to the size of the army was also problematic. It took time for accurate information about what was happening at the front lines to reach headquarters, and by then, situations had often changed. This was a weakness the Toyotomi forces actively sought to exploit.
Chapter: Toyotomi Forces Response.
The Toyotomi forces responded flexibly to the Tokugawa attacks. They often avoided direct power contests, instead initially absorbing the enemy's momentum before counterattacking. This yield and strike tactic was a specialty of experienced commanders like Sanada Nobushige and Goto Matabe. They never missed the opportunity to counterattack when the enemy's momentum waned. To compensate for their numerical disadvantage, the Toyotomi forces employed various tactics. For example, they frequently used feigned retreats to lure the enemy, then ambushed them with troops lying in wait. Surprise attacks from unexpected locations, leveraging their intimate knowledge of the terrain, were also effective. Such flexible responses temporarily created situations favorable to the Toyotomi forces. As the battle progressed, the Toyotomi forces increasingly shifted from pure defense to taking the offensive. In particular, units led by Sanada Nobushige advanced far enough to threaten the Tokugawa headquarters. This offensive shift was a major gamble, but necessary given that a purely defensive approach would clearly lead to defeat through attrition. Indeed, this aggressive strategy caused significant disruption within the Tokugawa forces. The Toyotomi forces strove for efficient use of their limited manpower by appropriately deploying reserve forces. They quickly sent reinforcements to areas facing breakthrough, while withdrawing troops from areas of advantage to redeploy elsewhere, maintaining flexible responses. However, the overall shortage of troops was insurmountable, and eventually they could no longer support all fronts. This would significantly influence the course of the battle.
Chapter 8. Turning point in the battle.
The battle shifted from stalemate when confusion began to emerge within the Toyotomi forces. Pressured simultaneously on multiple fronts, they could no longer respond adequately with their limited troops. In particular, the advance of the large army led by Tokugawa Hidetada from the south placed a heavy burden on the Toyotomi defensive line. Under these circumstances, the command structure began to falter. Amid the chaos of battle, misinformation spread within the Toyotomi forces. False reports that certain units had retreated caused other units to begin retreating as well, creating a chain reaction. Additionally, misinterpretations of enemy movements led to errors such as withdrawing troops from critical positions. Such mistakes accumulated, gradually turning the tide against the Toyotomi forces. As the battle intensified, the Toyotomi command structure became increasingly fragmented. Communication between frontline units and headquarters was severed, forcing individual units to fight in isolation. In this situation, implementing a unified strategy became difficult, and each commander had to act based on their own judgment. This made it impossible to effectively utilize the overall fighting force. As the situation progressively worsened, parts of the Toyotomi forces began to lose their fighting spirit. Particularly when rumors spread about the defeat of the main force, even units still capable of fighting began to retreat. Battles are often determined not only by physical strength, but also by psychological factors. The decline in morale among the Toyotomi forces became an even more decisive factor than the physical disparity in troops.
Chapter 9. Conclusion of the battle.
The advantage of the Tokugawa forces gradually became more pronounced. Utilizing their numerical superiority and the confusion within the Toyotomi forces, they steadily advanced their battle lines. The death of Sanada Nobushige, in particular, was a devastating blow to the Toyotomi forces. The units under his command fought valiantly to the end, but ultimately suffered a crushing defeat due to overwhelming numbers. In the final stages of the battle, Osaka Castle was engulfed in flames. Whether this was due to attacks by the Tokugawa forces or self-immolation by the Toyotomi side remains debated. Regardless, these flames became the symbolic scene of the Toyotomi clan's downfall. The sight of soldiers continuing to resist against the backdrop of the burning castle was a tragic spectacle signaling the end of the warring states period. As a result of the Osaka summer campaign, Toyotomi Hideyori and his mother, Lady Yodo, committed suicide, effectively ending the Toyotomi clan. The Toyotomi regime, built by Hideyoshi, closed its curtain after a mere 2 decades. This completed Tokugawa Ieyasu's unification of Japan and marked the official beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, which would continue for over 260 years. Many of the warriors on the Toyotomi side lost their lives in this battle. Notable commanders such as Sanada Nobushige, Goto Matabe, and Chosokabe Morichika met their end. Most of them fought to the very last, maintaining their dignity as warriors. Their brave final moments became stories that would be passed down through generations.
Chapter 10. Historical impact.
The Osaka Summer Campaign is regarded as the final decisive battle of the Warring States period. With the downfall of the Toyotomi clan and the disappearance of significant anti-Tokugawa forces, armed conflicts across the country rapidly subsided. The century-long era of strife came to a close. It marked not only the end of one era but also the beginning of another. With Tokugawa Ieyasu's complete victory, the Bakuhan system centered on Edo was established. This ushered in a relatively peaceful era that would continue until the Meiji Restoration, some 260 years later. This long-term peace significantly contributed to the development of Japanese culture, economy, and society. In this sense, the Osaka Summer Campaign was a battle that marked Japan's transition to the early modern period. The transition from the Toyotomi regime to the Tokugawa regime meant more than just a change in rulers. It signified a fundamental transformation in the political system. During Toyotomi Hideyoshi's era, centralization remained incomplete, and the daimyo maintained relatively high levels of autonomy. In contrast, the Tokugawa shogunate established a more rigid centralized system through institutions such as the Byukei, Shohado laws for the military houses, and the Sankin Kotai alternate attendance system. The Osaka Summer Campaign was a major turning point in Japanese history. It marked the transition from medieval to early modern times, from an era of war to one of peace, and most importantly, from the national vision pursued by Toyotomi Hideyoshi to that envisioned by Tokugawa Ieyasu. The lessons and influence left by this battle significantly shaped Japan's subsequent path. In this sense, the Osaka Summer Campaign was not merely a battle, but a decisive event that shaped Japanese history.
Conclusion.
The Osaka Summer Campaign was a decisive battle that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Despite their numerical disadvantage, the Toyotomi forces fought valiantly, utilizing terrain and clever tactics, but ultimately succumbed to the overwhelming forces of the Tokugawa army. As a result of this battle, the Warring States period came to a complete end, and the 260-year reign of the Tokugawa family began. This brought significant changes not only to Japan's political system, but also to its society and culture. Many of the warriors who participated in the Osaka Summer Campaign disappeared from the historical stage after this battle. Their brave fighting and tragic ends became a page in history to be passed down to future generations. And the land of Osaka, where they staked their lives in battle, remains in the hearts of many people as a monumental place where Japanese history took a major turn. Time has passed, and the battlefield has become a peaceful city. However, the memory of the fierce battle once fought here is eternally inscribed in history. The Osaka Summer Campaign. It was not merely a battle, but a fateful turning point that shaped the history of Japan.
Ending.
The sound of swords clashing, the shouts of soldiers, and the burning Osaka Castle over 400 years ago, Japanese history took a dramatic turn. The honor and resolve of the warriors who fell with the Toyotomi clan and the ideals they tried to protect until the end leave various lessons for us living in the modern age. The importance of strategy beyond mere numbers, the clarity of command structure, and above all, the indomitable spirit that never gives up. Aren't these values that remain relevant to us today? History is not merely a story of the past, but a mirror reflecting the image of us who live in the present. If, through this video, you have touched a moment in history and felt something, that is the greatest joy for us as creators.
On this channel, which delves into the depths of history, we will continue to explore decisive moments in Japanese history. If this explanation of the Osaka Summer Campaign has resonated with you even slightly, please subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, we can deliver our next video to you as soon as it's released. Also, your likes and comments provide valuable clues about what content interests you. To know the past is to create the future. Let's continue our journey through Japanese history together. Thank you for watching.